Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makudir, and it's time for our hashtag Africa Focus feature. This is a part of a show where we look at some of the biggest stories on the African continent, and there is one that I think is very, very important. We're going to be looking at Uganda. Voting has begun in that part of the continent. Uganda's presidential elections have kicked off today, but this is far from being what you'd call a routine ballot casting day. Millions of Ugandans are heading to the polls under a nationwide internet blackout. There are some friends and colleagues out in Uganda that we're trying to reach out to, but just can't. The internet has been shut down, and this measure has been imposed days before voting. And the elections themselves are happening under heavy security and reported crackdowns on opposition supporters. And it has almost cast a dark shadow over the process. The incumbent, President Yoweri Museveni, who's been in power since 1986, faces a significant challenge from opposition figure, popular Bobby Wine, former singer, former pop star, who transitioned into politics and has grabbed, shall I say, the imagination of especially young people of Uganda. But questions remain about the fairness of this vote and this domination and the narrative that civil liberty groups and other opposition party members are being targeted by the Museveni regime. And this has gotten widespread condemnation from a lot of human rights groups, from the United Nations, which I think for the most part have condemned the internet shutdown and the repression of dissenting voices, and warning that conditions risk undermining transparency and electoral credibility. And we're going to be doing a sort of deep dive into the elections out in Uganda with a very, very good friend of the show. He's a master's graduate at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg, Orapeleng Matshediso. Orapeleng, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on air, and looking forward to chatting to you about Uganda and the elections that we can't see, we can't hear. There's an internet blackout. We don't know what's happening inside Uganda.
Good morning, Silailo, and all viewers and listeners of Salam Media, and compliments of the new year.
Same to you, my brother. And I think we'll jump right into it. Just your quick scene setter of the Ugandan's political landscape at this current moment. Looking at Yoweri Museveni, the incumbent, and I think we can all agree the strongest challenger, Bobby Wine, and the political landscape leading up to today's elections. What should Africans make of it, and what do they need to understand about Uganda's political landscape at this current moment?
Thank you. I think Africans should understand the current political landscape from the perspective of knowing who the current president Museveni is. You would remember that Museveni came into power through barrel of a gun in 1986, and I think now he's staying in power through a barrel of a gun. It therefore means Africans should understand that here the opposition in Uganda is dealing with a character that does not believe in democracy. It believes in his will and the will of his associate. He can stay in power even if there should be bloodshed. So that on its own is not democracy. But what I want to bring as of a setter to this particular discussion is that you'd remember that these elections are very important on the basis that East Africa as a region historically has been one of the relatively stable region. But with the current political development and repression in Uganda and what recently happened in Tanzania, of course, leave much to be desired. And it is important also to say what President Museveni is doing in Uganda. One would say is a betrayal of what has become a chapter, African Charter for popular participation in transformation and development that was adopted in 1990 in Tanzania by African countries, which posed that it is what, of course, led to what we see today as what you call multi-party democracy in Africa. Whether this democracy benefits Africans is the debate for another day.
Very, very important to note. I want to look at Bobby Wine. What should we know about him? What are his chances of winning these elections, if there are any? And is he really the strongest challenger for Yoweri Museveni?
I think we need to note the courage that Bobby Wine has. In the previous election was harassed, in 2021 was harassed, but his courage, I think, should serve as a motivation. But the unfortunate part is that I think the opposition in Uganda was supposed to consolidate behind Bobby Wine if indeed they want to oust President Museveni, who has been in power for more than 40 years now. So what is important, I think, is that Bobby Wine might, of course, stand a chance, but with the split of votes to multi-opposition and presidential candidates, I mean, out of 8 presidential candidates, you would remember that in the previous elections, I think Bobby Wine got around 3 million out of 10 million voters who tend to voting stations in 2021. And you remember that at that time, registered vote were 18 million, only 10 million came to vote. One can attribute this to this political repression, of course, people fearing to go to the voting station to vote. The other thing is that there might be voter apathy amongst particularly young people. Sililo, in for the past 5 years, I think in 5 years, the unemployment rate amongst young people was 38 in 2020. Currently, it stands at more than 40% of young people unemployed. It therefore means in the past 5 years, the government has not tangibly done anything to create jobs, despite the fact that the country is amongst the countries that are rich in mineral resources. I mean, iron ore, which is very critical for production of steel that can assist in rolling out infrastructure that can create jobs. You go to uranium, that is very critical in terms of production of energy. But because the government seems to lack developmental perspective and, of course, the vision that could reduce unemployment and ensure that there is development in Uganda. So that's what is really happening. Maybe that more than 6 million that could not, more than 8 million that could not come for vote in 2021 might be some of these factors.
We are seeing this, strategy that is, becoming a trend, especially in Africa, where there's this blackout of the internet, especially when there are things like elections, or as you mentioned, what we saw recently in Tanzania with those protests and uprising. How significant is it? Because the moment you talk about Ugandan elections, the first thing that pops out is the internet blackout that has been imposed ahead of election day. What does it mean for voters? What does it mean for observers? And just the general dissemination of information. Why would a government impose an internet blackout just days ahead of an election?
I think this is an indication that this issue of vote rigging, of course, they want to do it in secret. I mean, a Democrat or any leader that believes in democracy would not actually shut down internet, because social media is a modern ways of mobilizing people to go and vote. If indeed you want people to come and vote and decide who they want to lead, then you shouldn't be suspending or shutting down internet. But I think this is the same script that, of course, was taken in the recent election of Tanzania, where they do not want the world to see repression and, of course, violence that will be taking place, where security will be harassing people during the elections. And this, of course, brings a serious an indictment to African Union and regional community in East Africa to see to it that, of course, something is done to all these particular trends that, of course, move in negative and regression in terms of democratic principles.
Mm, 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 mm. And apart from Bobby Wine, are there any other challenges, any other oppositional contenders that could hopefully chip away at Yuri Museveni's reign?
I don't think there, except Bobby Wine, there is any strong candidate. Uh, like I indicated, that in the previous elections, out of 10 million voters who voted, out of 18 million registered vote, Museveni receives 6 million, and of course, 3 million went to Bobby Wine. The rest got less than, of course, what would say, a threshold that can be seen as the contenders or strong opposition to in these particular elections. Whether that particular statistics is true or not, because of the dispute that, of course, always come after the elections in Uganda, is something that, of course, can be debated and researched at the later stage.
Mm, no, most definitely. And just lastly, before I let you go, Orapeleng, just given the fact that voting has already started and has started under these kind of conditions, what do you think are some of the indicators that a country like South Africa, the rest of the African continent, and international observers need to watch out for in the coming hours and days as we try and get whatever little information that we can get coming out of Uganda, seeing that there's a trend. I think even in 2021 they did the same thing, where there was an internet blackout and the world essentially just knew when the results were being released that Yuri Museveni has won once again with an overwhelming majority.
Yeah, with the current development, there are prospects that, of course, there might be a dispute again of the elections. They might be rigged with the current development of interference, of course, by the government of the National Resistance Movement of Museveni into the IEC and, of course, all institutions of government, in order to ensure that, of course, they win these particular elections. I mean, you would remember that, of course, Museveni, according to the result of the previous elections, he got 58% of the elections. Maybe we need also to say to African Union and African countries out there to say these elections are important in such a way that there is a usage of live ammunition according to the allegations, and that on its own it defeats what African Union has been advocating for the past 5 years: the silencing of the gun. The silencing of the
Mm.
gun has to start now, has to be implemented. An example had to be set. African leaders, when they convene, I think next month, they've got to look into all this particular wrong trend in terms of political repression and regression of governance and development on the continent. And what really are the problems? The problems must be confronted so that Africa can become, of course, a center of development and, of course, a center of human progression.
There you go, Orapeleng Matshediso, Research Associate out at the University of Johannesburg. Always a pleasure chatting to you, my brother, and looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
And that has been our hashtag Africa Focus feature with a focus on East Africa, particularly Uganda, which is currently heading to the polls. It's election day today. But yeah, we're not getting any kind of direct communication out of Rwanda. There are no live reports coming directly from there because there's an internet blackout. We tried to get in touch with our contacts, our colleagues who are in Uganda, who usually, when you reach out to them to get live updates, to get straight from the ground kind of perspective on the build up to the election and the elections themselves, they'll always avail themselves, but we can't. Try to call, nothing, email, WhatsApp messages, nothing is going through to them, and one can only try and imagine what's happening in Uganda at this current moment, given the fact that we've seen this trend before. It's not the first time that Uganda has undergone election day under an internet blackout without the eyes and ears and observation of the rest of the world, and then coming out a few days later with a winner, being Yuri Museveni, who's been in power for the last 40 years. So we'll try and get you all the latest coming out of Uganda, whatever information that is new and that is relevant to election day, and that we get our hands on. We'll try and share it with you guys. Yeah, but for now, complete blackout. Nothing. Zero. This has been #Africa Focus. We're going to take a quick break. News and Views continues after this.